kind of used to doing this Sabbath school lessons. This is the first time in like 8 years I've stood in front of everybody doing this. He used to say, I'm nervous. I feel totally undeserving you get to do this. It's interesting that I thought of preaching on the crucifixion a couple of weeks ago before I realized that the Sabbath school lesson today would deal with the cross. Matter of fact, some of the things that I brought up here in the Sabbath school lesson I'll probably repeat here. Hopefully I won't put anyone to sleep. I'd like to call your attention back to the scripture reading. For I am determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Paul had a... I'm kind of short and long like Paul. Paul had just come from Athens where he had a terrible time. He gave perfect speeches. Out-reasoned, out-rhetoricked. The Greek cross was there, but had very little in terms of the harvest there. He left them discouraged. That's why when he came to Corinth, he decided he was going to do something different. For I'm determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Now you need to realize something. What crucifixion really meant. A lot of times we'll see movies, actor is hung on a cross for 30 minutes, and he dies, resurrection scene next. But let's go into what Jesus actually went through to know exactly what God was willing to do. The responsive reading was picked up from Philippians. I want to go through that first, and I want you to picture where Christ was and where He ends up. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. He was God, yet He made Himself of no reputation, and took upon Him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in the fashion of a man, He humbled Himself, and not just to become a man. Don't forget the next verse. And became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Now you need to know something about a cross. We brought it up in Sabbath school lesson. The great orator, statesman, and writer, Cicero, wanted to remove the word cross from the vocabulary of the Greco-Roman world. He thought it was so disgusting, so humiliating, that a Roman citizen should not even hear the word. Crucifixion in those times. Let me kind of describe it. I'm going to go over it again when we actually get to the crucifixion of Christ. Crucifixion was typically reserved for runaway slaves and rebels against the Roman Empire. Rome was very efficient at crucifixions. A lot of times you'll see in these movies, they'll have Christ tied and nailed. No, the Romans were way too efficient for that. It was one or the other. Actually, if they wanted you to be on the cross longer, they typically tied you. And I'll talk about that later. If they wanted you dead a little sooner, nails. Actually spikes. You would be led out after a scourging, and I'll describe scourging later. After a scourging, you would be brought out. And crucifixions were not in a back alley. They were not behind some building. You were crucified on either a road or a hill where you could be made a spectacle of. You were a warning, a billboard sign in those days not to mess with Rome. They would lead you out carrying the patibulum, that's the crossbeam. You didn't carry the whole cross. The vertical part of the cross, the stipes, was already implanted on the hill. Although with Christ it was slightly different, and I'll talk about that. You would be, after being beaten half to death with the scourge, you would have this 110-pound beam place a cross your raw shoulders tied to it, and you would march out from the Praetorium 600 meters to Calvary. There you would be stripped totally naked. We have statues. They're wrong in several things. One, the nails, the spikes didn't go in the palms of the hands. They went in the wrists. I'll discuss that. But you were totally naked. The idea of crucifixion was not to kill you, just kill you slowly. It was to humiliate you while it was killing you. The Romans called it the summum supplicium, the extreme, the ultimate punishment. Well, there's ways of killing you in Rome. You could be beheaded. Paul went through that. You could be burned alive. Nero used to tie Christians to posts in his garden and set them on fire to light his garden parties at night. In the arenas, you could be thrown to wild animals and be torn apart. Crucifixion was seen worse than all of that. It was the worst punishment Rome could do to you, because it not only killed you slowly, but humiliated you while you were dying. We often pick up Christ's sufferings when he's being scourged by the Romans. But let's go back. I want to go back to Thursday night. Thursday night. They just finished the Lord's Supper. Actually, the Lord's Supper was part of the Passover Seder. He gave the normal elements that were used as part of the Seder into what we call the Lord's Supper. One of the things we know, I wouldn't say, well, in one gospel it says he had 1 cup. Another one he had 2. How many cups were there? 4. Actually, there were 4. But after they drank and they sang hymns, they went up to the Mount of Olives. And that's where Jesus' sufferings began. He was both God and man, totally man too. He suffered the way we did. But now he's about to face the most extreme punishment that Rome could lay on a person. 11 disciples followed him up there. His 3 closest, Peter, James, John, went to the inner garden with him. He said, please, stay up with me for a while. He's going to go through a tremendous agony out there. 3 times he left. 3 times he came back and they were asleep. When he went there, he was in such agony that Luke describes that he sweat drops of blood. Actually, mistranslation. The word by the physician Luke used the word thromba, clots of blood. A lot of people would say, "Oh, that sounds like something that was made up. That doesn't happen." Actually, it is in the medical literature. Look it up. Meningitis. What happens during times of extreme stress? The blood pressure will spike. The little blood vessels at the base of the hair follicles rupture. They form clots in there, and when you sweat, clots of blood come out. This is associated with extreme blood loss already. Not only that, how many people here have had a bad bruise? Hit something, and boy, nobody touch it. Everyone stay 10 feet away. A bruise, and it hurts. Think about your whole body being covered with bruises. Your entire body. Matter of fact, Christ was so tortured by that, so weakened by that an angel had to come to strengthen him so he could go on from there. 3 times he cried out to his Father, "If there's any way, I don't need to do this. Please." But finally, in the end, he surrenders and says, Not my will, but yours. This would be about midnight. At this time, Judas comes up. Judas was a close friend. During the Last Supper, people always think of at the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples are sitting in chairs around the table. It's not how it worked. There were couches that radiated from the middle of the table. Basically, you would lie down and you'd rest your head against the person next to you all the way around. John, the beloved disciple, was to the side of Jesus and rested his head against Jesus. Guess who Jesus was resting his head against? Judas. We know this because John asked him, who's going to betray you? He said, so who's going to betray you? Who's going to betray you? The person I hand this up to is the person who will betray me. He would hand it to the other person closest to him, Judas, his friend, the treasurer of the group. At midnight, Judas leads the temple guards to the Garden of Gethsemane. It's dark. It's not like that street lights out there. Lucky if the moon was shining. And at this time, he gives them an order. Whoever I kiss, that's the person you grab him. And he comes up to Jesus. And instead of a greeting of a kiss, it's a greeting of betrayal. Imagine having your friend come to you. You know what's going to happen, but when it actually happens, when your friend actually comes and betrays you right to your face, you can wrench your heart. Jesus could have saved himself. Matter of fact, Peter tried to save him. Cut off the ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant. A lot of people said, okay, he lost an ear. No. Malchus was now disfigured. He couldn't be in the temple anymore. And Jesus knows this. So his last healing act was to restore the ear of Malchus, a man who would bring him to be executed. So now they bind Jesus with rough ropes. Think about it. His entire body is already bruised, head to foot. And he's bound with heavy raw ropes, tight ropes. And then dragged to 3 illegal Jewish trials. The first one was to Annas, the former high priest, father-in-law of Caiaphas, the current high priest. Jesus was questioned. Jesus would answer. They next took him to Caiaphas, asked him questions again. Jesus wouldn't answer. They slapped him. They struck him in the face. How dare you not answer the high priest? According to Jewish law, you didn't have to give testimony against yourself. Matter of fact, the high priest was supposed to be your defense attorney. But they didn't want to defend him. They wanted him dead. So they blindfolded him and started smacking him in the face. Prophesy, who hit you now? And after they had their sport, they convened the Sanhedrin. Third trial. False witnesses everywhere. Couldn't make up their mind. Finally, Caiaphas gets up. The defense attorney gets up and asks Jesus to self-incriminate himself against Jewish law. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? And you said it. And they said, he's blaspheming. A lot of people think he's blaspheming because he said he's the Son of God. He blasphemed that he was the Messiah because in those days, many of the Jews believed that the Messiah was the Son of God. And Jesus had been proving it for 3.5 years. The blasphemy wasn't that he was the Son of God, but he even claimed to be the Messiah. They expected the Messiah would come as a royal king, in power and glory that could flatten the Roman armies. Not some peasant carpenter from Nazareth. What good could come out of Nazareth? After that, they, in acclamation, declared that Jesus was guilty. According to Jewish law, each one had to cast a single vote, but they didn't do that. Not only that, if you were convicted of a capital crime, they couldn't execute you on the same day. As a matter of fact, you weren't even supposed to have a trial at night, let alone a trial on a festival, breaking all Jewish laws, but they wanted him dead. So by 6 in the morning, they brought him to Pilate. But they didn't bring up charges of blasphemy. They said, he's telling people that he's a king, and he's telling people they shouldn't pay taxes. Even though they tried to trap him with that, they made him stumble. Pilate tried to save him. He knew that Jesus was innocent. He knew that these people were just jealous. But he didn't want to get his hands dirty. So what does he do? He takes the weakened, tired, battered Jesus, who was taken off the Mount of Olives to 3 separate trials, barely able to stand, and has him sent to Herod, who makes fun of him and sends him back. And Pilate, why do you want him dead? He said that he's the Son of God. Pilate was terrified. Terrified. Because they believed that gods had sons. Great heroes like Hercules was the son of Zeus. And you didn't mess with God's kids. Things would happen. Very bad things would happen if you did that. So he wanted to save it. So what does he do? He says, okay, there's a custom. Let's give them a choice. Barabbas or Jesus. He figures, Barabbas is this terrorist, a Roman terrorist. He's going to get crucified. Jesus, he's a healer. Surely the people will vote for him. But the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees turned them all against him. They asked for Barabbas. At this point, according to Roman law, you scourged your victim before sending them to the cross. Now you need to realize what a scourging was. It wasn't simply you whacked the guy a couple of times, taught him a lesson, and sent him off with the cross. Now Jewish law said you couldn't strike a man 40 times. Now, in fact, the Pharisees always wanted to make sure they didn't break the law, set the number down to 39 in case they miscounted by one. But he wasn't being whipped by Jews. He was being whipped by Roman soldiers. And they didn't simply use leather whips. They had short-handled leather whips, multiple strands. At the end were heavy metal balls. Matter of fact, some of them had hooks on them. They were colloquially known as scorpion whips. Along the length of the leather straps were embedded sharp pieces of metal and sharp animal bones. The idea was to strip the flesh off the back of the prisoner. Now, normally, you'd hit the prisoner, several times. They'd be screaming for mercy, and after you got your fill, you'd stop. Problem was, Jesus didn't scream. He wasn't giving them the sport they wanted. So they kept beating him, and beating him, and beating him, till there was literally no flesh left on his back and the side of him, in the back and sides of his legs and his shoulders. Finally, the centurion there realized if we beat this guy anymore, he's not going to make it to the cross. So they release Jesus. He falls into a pool of his own blood. At this point, they say, well, we did get our sport beating him. Let's try something different. Let's turn him into a king. He says he's a king, right? So they sit him up, his hands still bound. They put a purple cloak around him. They put a reed in his hands, and they placed a crown of thorns. Now, when we think thorns on a crown, we're thinking of roses, right? Those little bitty thorns that have no, these are Jerusalem thorns. These were like sharpened needles, 2 to 3 inches long. They plated a crown, and not just a circular crown, over the entire top. And they put this on Jesus' head, pressed it down. Now, anyone who's ever cut their scalp, or men when you shave, bleeds a lot, doesn't it? because all this area is very nasty. So Jesus bleeds again, a lot. And to make sure it stays in place, they take the reed from his hand and they use it to bang the crown of thorns tighter and tighter on his head. At this point, they wanted Pilate's approval to go ahead, so they bring him before Pilate, and Pilate is aghast at this point. But there's no turning back. He wants to release him, but the chief priests and the Pharisees cried, "If you release him, you are no friend of Caesar." That was a very serious charge. If you were not a friend of Caesar, Caesar would kill you. And Pilate didn't want to risk that, not for some peasant carpenter from Nazareth. So he said, "Okay, crucify him." At this point, the 110-pound about beam, the baptism, the crossbar, is placed on Jesus' shoulders. Shoulders have already been stripped partially to most of the skin on his shoulders from the beating that he got from the scorpion. He's tied to it, marched down the Via Dolorosa, 600 meters from the Praetorium to Calvary. Problem is he can't make it there. He's gone beyond human endurance at this point. Remember, he's fully man. He felt everything. Matter of fact, he falls, and if you strap like this to a cross and you fall first forward, what's going to happen? Your face smashes into the ground. So they lift him up, his face marred even more. And they cut him loose. They said, "We need to get someone else to carry this, or we're not going to be able. He's going to die before we can kill him." So they get Cyrus Cyrene to carry the cross. But even then, without carrying the cross, he stumbles 2 more times because he's almost at the point of death already from the scourging and from the bleeding of blood the night before. So they march him to Calvary. And normally when you get to Calvary, let's not forget, the Tigris, it's a plaque with your crimes on it, on a stick. They would march that in front of you. In Jesus' case, 3 languages. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in Aramaic, in Greek, and in Latin. You want to make sure everybody knew it. Of course, this really upset the Pharisees and the chief priests and the scribes. "No, you need to change that. Just say he claimed to be Jew." No. Pilate said he's going to get even with them. "No, what I've written, I've written." And so on the cross, Jesus is proclaimed to be the King of the Jews against the wishes of high priests and Pharisees. So the procession goes out. Jesus falls 2 more times. They get to Calvary. Now, as I said, normally the stipes, the vertical part, is already in the ground. Basically what would happen, there was a hook on there, a hook on the patibulum. You nailed the prisoner to the crossbeam, you hooked it on the top of the stapes, and you nailed the feet in there. Problem is, they only had 2 stapes, and they had 3 prisoners. So they had to dig another hole in between the other 2. Normally, putting a person on the stapes is not bad. You lift it up, like it on there, 9 on in the feet. But not with Jesus. He lays back, his hands are nailed to the crossbeam. Now, not in the palms of the hands. And not with simple nails. These are basically railroad spikes. Squared railroad spikes that have point. And it went between the 2 rows of bones in the wrist. Like I said, the Romans were very efficient. They had solid bone all around the nail. The spike. Not only that, if you put a spike in there, guess what it does? There is a major nerve that runs through the hand called the median nerve. It's right through there. Any of you have ever fallen asleep on your hand and all of a sudden it starts really burning? You gotta shake it to wake it up. It's asleep, and it hurts, it burns a lot. Think of what happens if that nerve is partially cut. And every time he pulled out the nail, it rubbed against the nerve, the partially broken nerve. So they nailed Jesus to the patibulum. And they think, well, why waste 2 steps? Let's not put the stipends in there and then put the crossbeam on it. Let's do it all at once. So they attached the patibulum to the new stipends, and they lift it up, and they drop the staples into the ground. Think what that does to the hands and feet. That sudden jerking motion. It pulls like this. It tears the flesh even more around the wrists. It tears the flesh in the feet even more. He got worse than the other 2. Then he would reinforce the staples in the ground, and then he would sit back and laugh. Of course, you had to affix the sign of the charges. So they would nail the back of the post to the back of the staples, and the sign would be there. A lot of people vision the cross as our normal Latin cross. No, it was what's called a tau cross, T-shaped. The only thing that made it look like a Roman cross was that sign that was held above it. Once he was affixed, and remember, since they're doing everything all at once, they nailed his feet while they were still horizontal. So now he is hung on the cross, suspended. One of the things you need to know about crucifixion: you didn't die of exposure, you didn't die of starvation, you died of suffocation. When your arms are held out like this, you cannot move the chest muscles. You can try to breathe with your diaphragm a little bit, but after a while you start suffocating to death. The only way to breathe is to pull up on the nails and push up on the nails in your feet to raise yourself up to take a breath. And then when you got tired, you slump back down again. And the process will repeat itself for 6 hours. First time Jesus lifts himself up, the guards are ready. Every prisoner would curse and scream at the guards for doing this to them. Jesus lifts up, and the first words that come out of his mouth is, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Later on, the penitent sinner on one side, one of the thieves. They use the word thieves, but basically he was a rebel against the government of Rome. They would raid the storehouses of armies of Rome, take them to the anti-Roman groups that were there. He asked Jesus, please remember me. And Jesus gives him a promise. I'm telling you today, just when you think I can't do anything about it, I'm telling you today that you will be with me in paradise. Not paradise that day, but I'm telling you today, when you think all hope is lost, I'm going to have you in paradise with me. There's another problem he needs to deal with. He has to lift again because his mother was there. She was already a widow. She had other children, James. But James didn't believe in Jesus at this time. He had to wait until after the resurrection. So he wanted to make sure his mother was taken care of. So he lifts himself up again on the nails and says, Woman, behold thy son, nodding to John. And John, behold thy mother. He makes sure his mother is taken care of. It's now getting to the 12 o'clock time. 12 to 3. A darkness covers over all of Jerusalem. Supernatural darkness. Wasn't expected. Because the Father now has to turn his face away from the Son. The Son whom he loves for an eternity before had to turn his face away from his Son because his Son was now the sin bearer. And Jesus felt that. If we go to the 22nd Psalm, we'd like to go past the 22nd Psalm into the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. But let's stop at the 22nd Psalm. Because now when Jesus lifts up, he has something else to say. My God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? O my God, I cry out in the daytime, but thou hearest not. In the night season, I am not silent. For thou art holy, thou art the one who inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and you delivered them. They cried unto you, and they were delivered. They trusted in you, and were not confounded. But I'm a worm and no man, a reproach of men despised of the people. They see me and laugh me to scorn. And this is for the benefit of the scribes and the Pharisees in there. They all see me and laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip, shake their heads, saying, he trusted in the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him now, seeing that he delighted in him. They told Christ, hey, if you come down from the cross, we'll believe. The problem was, if he came down from the cross, they were all damned. He had to stay there. He could have left at any time, but he stayed until the end. They gaped upon me with their mouths, and ravening and roaring lion. I poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, and is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like potsherd. In a little bit he'll say, I'm thirst. And my tongue cleaveth to my jaws. Now it's brought me into the dust of death. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. He was pointing out the fact that prophecy was being fulfilled. Then he said, I thirst. Bloodlust. But they offered him cheap wine, the wine that the legionnaires would keep on hand to get drunk. They offered him on a sponge, but he turned it down. No, he was going to take the punishment to the fullest. He just wanted them to realize that even in saying, I thirst, he was fulfilling prophecy. At this point, Jesus knows that he can't last much longer. He's slowly dying of asphyxiation. The screaming pain in his hands and his feet, and the spasms that result from that, are keeping him from continuing to lift himself up. So finally he says, it's finished. Actually in the Greek, it has been completed. In other words, an act today will continue on from this point forward into the present. And then he gives his final gasp on the cross. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And then he simply relaxes and lets himself suffocate to death. Later, the Roman soldiers want to bring the prisoners down from the cross because the Jews are really upset. They don't like people hanging on trees, especially over the holidays. You can't have this going on during Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Joseph of Arimathea has already gone to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, but he wants to make sure Jesus is dead. And the centurion said, yeah, he died. He did. Normally they last a bit longer. Yeah, but we beat him half to death before he even got to the cross. So they said, well, make sure. So for the other two prisoners, they do the crucifragium. They get large metal bars and they break the legs of the prisoners because now they can't lift up. And they suffocate to death quickly. But to Jesus, they knew he was already dead. So they take a lance, they pierce his side. At this point, he's been dead. The blood in his heart has been clotted. So when they pierce his heart, What comes out is serum and blood clots. Sure sign of death. John records it. At this point, they take him down from the cross and they bury him. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of times we'll sing the old rugged cross, but we make it beautiful. When Jesus went through this, it wasn't beautiful. It wasn't lovely. It was the cruelest death that the Roman Empire could inflict on a person. And the surprising thing is, he knew about this not during his time here on earth. He knew about this before he even created you. He knew that we would fall. He knew that when he created us, he would be facing the cross. And he did it anyway. One of the things we spoke about in the Sabbath school lesson is, why the cross? I mean, the Greeks wanted wisdom. The Jews wanted a conquering Messiah. Why not come as both? Why not show all the signs and wonders of God's power? Why the cross? Because this was the ultimate sign of how much God loved us and was willing to do to save us. He was willing to go through the horror of the cross, the shame of the cross, because he would not hold back. He was going to do everything. He wasn't going to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll do this from afar. I can fix things from heaven. I don't need to come down there. No. He loved us enough to become a man and die even the death of the cross in order to save us. To show us that there is no one here who has fallen beyond his wanting to save you. Nothing. So when we sing about the cross, when we look at all the decorative crosses around, don't just bypass it. It's not simply, oh, it's a symbol. It's a symbol of hope. It is. But it's also a symbol of torture that the Son of God went through in order to save you. That's the message of the cross. God loved the world so much that he was willing to do anything and everything to save you. Matter of fact, it's interesting, we have a few verses from Isaiah. Isaiah wrote in chapters 50 to 54 what's called the servant songs. It was songs about the suffering Messiah. And if we listen, Isaiah 50, verse 6. I gave my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who plucked my beard. My face I did not shield from buffeting and spitting. And then we go on to 52. Just as there were many who appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond any man, and his form more beyond human likeness. And in 53 he sums it up. But he was wounded for our transgressions, not his, ours. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was laid upon him, and with his stripes we're healed. For we are like sheep that have gone astray, we have turned one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He bore everything that you should have been punished for, because he wanted to make a way. He wanted to save you, and he was willing to go to the cross for that. Let's not forget.